Now we are progressing in our vodcasting. I would like you to understand why I'm focusing on specific things and why I'm repeating same concepts again and again and again. In the intro of our website, you can see the key ideas of what we need to discuss. And we have already discussed this related to the data and the different types of representation. And we put a lot of discussion into the ethical dimensions of collecting the data, using appropriate sampling and valid, reliable and generalizable data. And the last but not least is we have to discuss about the kinds of designs related to our topic, and the fact that all these designs and methods have advantages and disadvantages. The curriculum outline makes very, very clear that we need to discuss the particular research question and their advantages and disadvantages, and in every question they ask every year, they insist in this kind of format: name one advantage or one disadvantage, or name two advantages of this design or disadvantages. And this is because it is in our curriculum. So they ask you to discuss advantages and disadvantages of the designs and advantages and disadvantages of the investigations that are related to quantitative and qualitative design and data collection method. So sometimes the questions could be related to the way the data are collected. Remember, we discussed that the name of the design very often is closely knit with the kind of data we are collecting. And of course, we need to discuss the difference between experimental and these experimental investigations, that they give us quantitative data, and the other kind of quantitative investigation, the observational one. So we need to make very clear that we need to clarify all this. And this is the reason I have earlier put a lot of effort discussing what is the physiological and what's the behavioral account and the scores of standardized intelligence tests. This is not because I have a special like or dislike, but it is because they are in the curriculum statement. We need to make clear that you understand the terms. Okay, and what is what? Okay, let's go now to the PowerPoint, and I need us to start from the current slide. We have done all this. We have discussed the research question with regards to the measurements in the data, the population, the ethics, and now we need to understand how all these things, especially population, data and ethics, impact on the design. Do you think that they impact on the design? Of course they do. If I want to have all of these correct, I need to write my method in a way that it takes into account all of this. I've discussed earlier about the data and the measurements, and of course the fact that no participant will be harmed, as well as all the groups have to be represented, and my findings at the end have to be trustworthy and not only valid, but to mirror the wider population outside of the lab. This is what we're going to discuss now, how our design and the data and the actual method I'm conducting my experiment is going to be reflecting what my previous knowledge on population, data collection, and ethics is clear and apparent. Okay, we are going to the fourth page, the Research Design Psychology, and this is a website I'm going to visit soon. I'll have in one side, in one page, not sub-pages because it will be very complicated. On one side, the 3 columns. One side you will see the experimental, in the middle you will see the observational, and the other side you will see the qualitative design, focus group and Delphi technique. But this is how we start. We start on the designs that we have to learn. We have to study the specific ones, nothing else, no less. No more, no less. So, I want you to pay attention to the question. Is the design the researcher choose to use a design that it will be determined by the question or the hypothesis we investigate? And what's the difference between the question and the hypothesis? Actually, it's not. It is a technicality. I want you to understand that I test a hypothesis when I have an experimental design. In all the other cases where I'm not testing hypotheses, but I'm just observing natural characteristics, and I'm posing a question which has to be answered, I'm responding and I'm talking about a different kind of design, the observational or the qualitative design. However, for the purposes of our research programs in the SAIS psychology, you will see that we will collect data in a given design, and we will have such a plethora of data that you can, after the data collection, to choose the design you're working on. And you can claim, okay, I collected this, and this data, but at the end, I'm choosing to present this kind of data. For example, in the persuasion, I'm going to use 2 groups. I'm going to use a video for both groups. Am I going to manipulate a variable? Do I show the video to only one group and the other one is not watching a video? No. So theoretically, I'm not doing an experiment, because the main characteristic of the experiment design, manipulating in one group only the variable and compare the findings, is not existing, it's not there. Therefore, in this case, I will say that I don't have any hypothesis related to my dependent and independent variable. I will have a research question. At the end of the day, though, it's not a big thing to say that you have a hypothesis and a research question. I would like to make sure that you test the hypothesis when you choose the experimental design or the quasi-experimental design. For example, this is your turn. We have this investigation: the effect of sleep deprivation on academic performance. I want you to practice and discuss what kind of data would you choose to collect and how this data can impact on your design. We're starting from data. We're not starting from the kind of design. Okay, have that in your mind. So I choose now. Do I want to speak to the people? Do I want their opinion? Or I want to measure the hours they sleep and the grade they get? If I want to measure and compare the hours they sleep and the grade they get, I'm having what kind of design? Is it experimental or observational to begin with? I hope you said observational, because I'm not doing anything to my participants. I just see how many hours they sleep and observe the grade they get. I don't force them to stay sleepless. However, because I'm collecting numbers of the hours they sleep and the grade they get, it will be an observational, quantitative. If I ask them to write down in their diary how they feel in the day of the exam, during the exam, after a sleepless night, then I have observational and qualitative data, because I observe their performance, even through their subjective recount of the situation. Okay? So we start easy. We start trying to see in the next slide, and I want you to try and do it, and we're going to do it in the class, how this question will be related to this experimental design, to this observational, on this qualitative design. And I want you to tell me how you're going to collect quantitative, objective data, quantitative, subjective data, qualitative, objective data, or qualitative, subjective data. So we need to start thinking. Quantitative, numbers; objective, something that nobody can argue that they are not reliable. Numbers, reliable. Say hours of sleep, versus, something's wrong with my mouse, hours of sleep versus grade. That's G. Okay? That could be objective, quantitative. Quantitative, subjective. Remember, subjective, self-report, rating scale. Okay. So if they will put a number, how they tired they feel, and what grade they think they will get, that will be quantitative, subjective. Qualitative, objective. How many times they write down in their response, I feel crap, I feel awful, I feel bad, I'm thinking I'm failing. Okay? Frequencies. And in the qualitative, subjective data, you will need to write just their feelings. I feel crap, Maria said. Okay? We're going to do that in the class, and we're going to make sure that you understand all this, and we're going to use the activities from the worksheet 1. Next one. In this video we're going to discuss only the experimental design or the quasi-experimental design, and the observational and qualitative will be in the next video. All the previous introduction to designs and data, the relationship between designs and data, applies to all the designs we're discussing in science and psychology. Again, remember you have to go to the site if you want to read more, and I will scroll this data with you. Let's see the major characteristics of the experimental design. The experimental design or the experiment design can be simple or complex. I can ask one thing or I can ask too many things. I can use one variable or one variable and then another one, and then another one, and then another one, trying to find what is causing what effect. It can be very quick, like I could just collect data, or I can go collect data again, have different groups, cross-check the groups, have pre-testing, post-testing, check them when they're 2 years old, when they're 5 years old, when they're 72 years old, every 2 years. I can have small sample, that could be a case study in experiment mode, or can be extended, okay, in all the populations, all the young people. But all these experimental designs, they have common characteristics, and these common characteristics related to manipulating the independent variable by the researcher. So it's called IV for independent variable. What is independent variable? It is a variable, as we're going to discuss later, that it has been chosen by the researcher and it is considered the cause that impacts on something else, another variable, and we observe how the IV influences DV. For example, IV, independent variable, is the amount of coffee you're drinking. DV, dependent variable, is the hours you sleep. So, if I manipulate the spoons of coffee or the number of coffees you have in a day, and I can see that you stay sleepless, then I can establish a cause and effect relationship. I can say that because you drink too many coffees, you stay sleepless. So this is the experiment design. An IV that it is influencing the DV, an independent variable that influences the dependent variable. And in order to make that more scientific, I need to apply this in my two groups. And that means I have two groups. And because I have two groups, the experiment group and the control group, I need to random allocate my sample to my groups. Remember the sampling discussion we had? I need to randomly select the population and find my sample. I need to randomly allocate the participants of my sample to the groups. And I can cross-check the groups, I can pre-test, post-test, I can pair them, I can have one trial first in the experiment group and then the next trial from the control group. Pairs, as we said, and we have discussed that. Remember the video? The idea is, though, that you can do all of this in order to avoid other parameters to affect your results and destroy the validity and the reliability of your data. Okay? So these are the four characteristics. These are the four characteristics. Manipulating the IV, observing the effect the IV has on the DV, the existence of two groups, experimental and control group, and the random allocation of the participant in the groups. I don't have the class who is not randomly allocated participating in experiment. Those who choose psychology, they're already presenting some characteristics, similar, pre-existing characteristics. They have an interest on that. Or they don't have an interest on chemistry, on physics. They are more language people. Therefore, they are not so mathematical oriented. So do you understand that? When I do experiment in this kind of class, I have already some pre-existing or confining external variables I cannot control. They're beyond my control. So my experimental design is very important to remember that demonstrates random allocation of participants in the groups. So I want you to remember, do I have random allocation of participants in groups? Yes. Then my experiment is completely controlled, because my sample is not biased to one direction. Number two is there's no random allocation of participants in the groups. Then I'm checking, is there a control group, an experiment group? Yes. So that means I still have two groups. Then it is like an experiment. Quasi in Latin means like. So because I have an experimental group and a control group, but not random allocation, I'm not doing experiment, I'm doing like an experiment. So my question is this: did Zimbardo had an experiment or a quasi-experiment? When I separate you into groups and one group is watching a video and the other one is not watching a video, is it experiment or quasi-experiment? Answer this, and we're going to discuss it in the class as well. So, let's see the other option. The other option is this: if I don't have random allocation of participants in the groups, like my psychology class altogether, and I do not have control group, then I'm just observing. Do you understand that? Okay. So, to have an observational design, I have group that by itself has been created, and I don't have control group. I apply the same experiment, the same questions, the same standard tests to everybody, then it is an observational design. Let's deal with these questions, and we need to answer them in the class. Is quasi-experimental design still an experiment? You have to tell me, explain. And you have to tell me when the researchers choose quasi-experimental designs. For what reason? Now, also I want you to think, what is the key word I need to hear to understand that we're talking about experiment. Is the keyword control and experiment group, or is the keyword random? I hope you said random allocation. Last question, which we're going to discuss in the class. Can I have a non-experimental design and still have random allocation? Be careful of the words. Can I have a non-experimental design and still have random allocation? Allocation, not selection. Okay, I think you got it. Now, something else we need to continue asking these questions. The experimental designs can be strictly controlled in a lab or can be outside of the lab in naturalistic setting in the field, which are called field work. Can you mention one advantage of this kind of experimental design when it happens in naturalistic setting? It's in the book, but I will mention one or two here. For example, it's cost effective. You don't need to organize expensive lab. People are in their own environment, so they feel relaxed. And the next question, you can go on and say other things. Remember, keep these questions in your table. We need to discuss them soon. And I want you also to discuss with me what is the best way to collect data from a sleep deprivation experiment in lab or in real situation. We need to discuss it in class. Tell me some positives and some negatives. I need a quick question in the class. I want you to answer it very quickly to check your answers. This is why I'm not responding. Please keep notes of this in the class to remember. Now, we said that in the experiment process I have variables, the independent variable and the dependent. So this is the way I am doing the experiment process. I'm randomly allocating my participants in the experiment on the control group. I pre-test both participants. I apply my experimental treatment or the IV, okay, and then I test again my group and I see what is this treatment, what's the impact of this treatment to the test of my experiment group. So I see if somehow this finding here of this test and this finding here of this test differ. If they differ and my groups have done everything the same, I know that the difference is due to the manipulation of the independent variable. For example, if I have two groups and I pre-test them in mathematics and this group has a result 10 and this group has a result 10, perfect score in mathematics, and then I sleep deprive, no sleep, this group, but this group has the normal sleep, and then I have test and they give me 8 and they give me 10, I know that this group has less grade, less grade. Why? Because they were sleepless. So the independent variable would be the sleeplessness. Okay? And the dependent variable would be their grade. So, I want you to tell me why this design needs to have, experimental design needs to have pretesting. Okay, so the pretest compares how similar how are the groups and how common they behave in the same thing. What is the researcher establishing by pretesting? We need to discuss that in class. So, also you need to answer, when is the post-testing happening? And what is the researcher expecting to find with the comparison? The researcher is expecting to find a cause and effect relationship. Now, I need you also to answer this question. What is the experiment or treatment in terms of variable? Is it a dependent or independent variable? The terminology, what the terminology is meaning. Okay. It is the independent variable. I want you to remember that sometimes you can hear the word not independent variable. You can hear other words like the group has gone through treatment. The group has gone through experimental treatment. On purpose they avoid to say the independent variable word to see if you can identify what is the independent and what's the dependent variable. These questions have been asked. Can we establish another difference between the experiment and control group with regards to the way they are manipulated? Is there any other difference between these two groups except the independent variable? Okay, the answer is no. Let's discuss, if you don't know as yet, what independent variable is. It is a variable that's manipulated or changed by the experimenter to see the effect this variable has on the dependent variable. And this is why it's called independent variable, because it is the cause. It's only used in the experimental design and has usually numerical value. Now, the one we actually observe is the dependent variable. So we manipulate the independent because we want to observe the dependent. In the experiment, again, it has a numerical value. It's called dependent because it's depending on the impact of the independent. So by observing the dependent variable, we observe the effect. There are other variables you have read in your books. I want you to understand that the independent is changed by the researcher, the dependent is observed for the results, but we have the extraneous variables and the confounding variables which we try to avoid in an experimental situation and we cannot avoid in the observational and qualitative designs. So what are the extraneous variables? The extraneous variables are the participants' individual characteristics. For example, the fact that somebody is by himself in need of less hours of sleep. Okay, we have a chart that belongs to the control group, and sorry, in the experiment group. I'm going back to the design I used earlier in this group. So we have randomly allocated a boy here in the experimental group who is pre-tested 10, and we keep them sleepless, and he is post-tested and his result is 10. But this boy has a natural, let's say, individual characteristic of needing not many hours of sleep, performing equally well when he has slept 6 hours instead of 8. These are the individual characteristics of the participant. Also, sometimes the experimenter can affect the existence of the experiment there. The participation has an impact. Zimbardo had an impact. The doctor in Mingler's experiment who says to the people, do that, please continue, they have an effect. This is why in modern researches they are observed, but without knowing that they observed. Also, the order effect is very important. This is why we change the order. Remember the videos we watched about the order effect? And if we have the experiment happening in the lab, the artificiality can be an extraneous variable. People are reacting in a different way in the lab, a different way in their home. Also, non-standardized instructions and procedures can highly impact on the results. Remember I told you that I collected some data for my research, and the participants, the people who are collecting the data, had somehow impacted because they in the research because they didn't follow the standard instructions and procedures. They were instructed not to say anything to the students, but they thought that they would be helping the students by saying stuff. So I had to collect data again. Sometimes we are having other variables which we're calling them co-founding, and that means there are responses which are called demand characteristics. People are responding in the way they think the others want them to respond. You can find another term on this. It's called people are giving socially desirable responses. They want to be liked and respond in a way they think that it is the correct one. And confounding is the placebo effect. People are feeling that they have been influenced by the fake medication. So, in order to minimize these extraneous and confounding variables, the researchers have to make very important effort, a lot of effort, in the way they are selecting the participants. They have to put a lot of hours to allocate the participants correctly, completely randomly, and they try to counterbalance, they have to counterbalance the experiments. They have sometimes to do single and double balancing procedures. That means cross-check the experiments. So if this is the experimental group and this is the control group, start with this first and then this one, and go like this. Okay, different procedures. So we have watched that video, and they can don't use or explain the use of placebos. in a way that it is very clear, and mainly have so standard procedures that the participants cannot be confused. This is the test of your self-activities I want you to do. We're going to work in the class. They are activities from the book, but I need to ask some extra questions on this, and I think we are done with this. And the next thing we're going to discuss is the advantages and disadvantages of the experimental design. I want to determine if the video games create violence. See this little face? Or Bandura wanted to see if children watching violence become violent, and he did that experiment. He even offered them lollies if they do the bad thing. Was that ethical? No. Therefore, we choose to use observational designs in order to avoid unethical research designs. So let's see the advantages of the experimental design. We try to eliminate unwanted extraneous variables. We control the extraneous variables more than any other research method, exactly because everything is in clinical lab situation. The experimental design involves manipulating the IV, so it establishes a cause and effect relationship. Because of the strict conditions and the control, we can have repeatability and replicability. We can do again and again and again and check if we have the same results. So that means it gives a great reliability of the findings and lifts psychology to the scientific level. So the researchers are confident that they know what they say, and have the ability to use both qualitative and quantitative methods. Disadvantages. Sometimes, although we try very hard, it's not possible to eliminate the extraneous variables. And sometimes the participant characteristics are there and stay. The experiment is not the real world. People can be affected, and that's the experimental effect. It may be unethical or impossible to randomly assign people in these groups. For example, you study criminals, pathogenic criminals. You cannot actually ask other people, a sample of random allocated people, to conduct a crime. I will show you a video where they make humans to choose and make an unethical choice, a crime choice, but they don't ask them really to kill. They imitate that with computers. And we already said that it is unethical to deliberately deprive children from sleep. Sometimes it's impossible to observe jet lag. It's very expensive. Send people around the world. So you need to choose those who are by themselves or traveling. It's unethical to experiment with children, punishing them just to see the effects of punishment to to their character. Okay, so we cannot actually do that, but in this case we can observe the character of children that have been traumatized, punished, physically abused. The next video will include the observational and qualitative and quantitative designs. Before I go there, I would like to escape this and take us to the website. I want you to understand that we do it the same way. You click Research Designs and it takes you to this site. I don't know why it's not working. It takes you to this number 4 site where the experimental designs, they're here. All of the things I have discussed can be found here in a different way, and I want you to watch the videos of the variables, and all these things can be found here again. All the advantages and disadvantages have more analysis here, and in this part you will see the quantitative and observational design and the qualitative designs that we are going to discuss in the next video. So I will start the next video from this part. I'm sorry for the format. It's because I'm of the site. It's because I've changed the resolution of the screen so I can have a better quality of the video.